This is a CBS News special report. I'm Tony Dokoupil. We're coming on the air as the Supreme Court just ruled on a pair of major cases tied to presidential power and the question of whether the president can fire members of independent federal agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The first case involved the firing of FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter, fired by the president without cause, and the firing of Federal Reserve Board of Governors member Lisa Cook with cause. That was the second case. So let's get right to CBS News Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford, who's been reading through these two rulings. Jan, good morning to you. Begin wherever you like. What do we have?
Well, we have two very important decisions on presidential power and whether or not, as you said, the president can fire not only a member of the Federal Trade Commission, but upwards of 24 other federal agencies that Congress had created to kind of be bipartisan and more independent, and whether or not he can remove a governor on the Federal Board of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors for cause without giving her any notice whatsoever. It's a mixed bag for the president in these rulings. I think, Tony, the most important ruling does concern the Federal Reserve Board. President Trump, as you said, had tried to remove Lisa Cook, saying that she had committed fraud on a mortgage application before she was nominated as governor by President Biden. He sought to remove her for that, saying he had grounds under the law to remove her. But she got no notice. She had no hearing. He announced this on social media. And the Supreme Court today, in an interim ruling in this kind of emergency application that came up to the court, said that that wasn't good enough, that the Federal Reserve is unique and different among these independent federal agencies, that Congress set it up to kind of oversee our monetary policy, and its independence is sacrosanct. And if a president is going to remove a member of the Federal Reserve, there has to be cause, and there's got to be some kind of process, a hearing and notice, again, critical to preserve the independence of the Federal Reserve Board and its role in regulating and setting our money supply. Again, this decision was written by the Chief Justice John Roberts, as was the other decision. That would involve the Federal Trade Commission, another independent, once bipartisan federal agency created by Congress in 1914. In that law establishing the Federal Trade Commission, and again, like laws governing several other couple dozen other federal agencies, Congress limited the president's power to remove commissioners, saying that they had to be staggered and they should be bipartisan. Today, the court said that violates the Constitution's separation of powers, that these executive agencies now have so much power that the president has to be able to say he's in charge of them, that the buck stops with the president because they're acting on his behalf, unlike when they were created 100 years ago, and that voters have to know who to hold accountable if you don't like what the FTC is doing. So that's that ruling, a win for the president. He can replace these members of these independent executive agencies like the Federal Trade Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, on, but not the Federal Reserve. That is different. The markets have been watching that case very closely. As you know, Tony, the president had threatened to try to fire former chairman Jerome Powell. So this now will keep the Federal Reserve independent and protected as Congress had intended, Tony.
All right, Jan, thank you very much. Let's bring in Jessica Levinson. She's a CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor. Jessica, thank you very much for being here. Rebecca Slaughter would have seemed, on the face of it, to have a better case here than Lisa Cook because she was fired for the president for no other reason other than the president saying it was inconsistent with his priorities. That's not cause, as it was written in the law. What does this mean for everybody else at all the other federal agencies?
I think this is such an important question because, as Jan said, this is about a president's power. It's not about Rebecca Slaughter and what her case specifically was, or Lisa Cook and the case that she had in saying that the government should not have tried to remove her. I think we have to look at this through the different lens, which is this is all about what does a president, this is not just about President Trump, what does any president have the power to do? And what the court says today is very consistent with what it has been saying for years, which is when it comes to the executive branch, and specifically these independent executive agencies, that the president does get to fire and hire people at will, as Jan said, because somebody needs to be able to be held accountable. The president is elected to be head of the executive branch. And so I think the point today with respect to Slaughter's case is that it doesn't matter if there was any reason, that this should be, in the court's view, up to the president to decide. And then when it comes to Lisa Cook, we're basically bubble wrapping the Fed. We're saying that's different. It doesn't look like the FTC. It doesn't look like the NLRB. It doesn't look like these other alphabet agencies, because what they do is different. And so we have, I think, an acknowledgement that not all agencies are the same, at least with respect to this carve out for the Fed, where the court is saying, looks like a bare majority of the court is saying that Lisa Cook needed some process, that she needed some notice and opportunity to be heard before, in fact, the president tried to remove her. And it's important to note that the president didn't challenge the for-cause provision when it came to the Fed. Of course, that was challenged for the FTC.
All right, Jessica, thank you very much. I want to bring in Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett. Major, in many ways, the Supreme Court has empowered this president, but in other significant ways restricted this president. And today we have another mixed decision on that front. What do you make of the politics of it?
The Federal Reserve is different. That's what the Supreme Court said. And there has to be a process by which, if the president, any president, is going to fire a sitting Fed governor confirmed for that position by the United States Senate, you have to provide that person, under all circumstances, means by which to challenge the reason that that person was fired. Because the Federal Reserve is not only central to the United States economy, not only was it set up differently than these quasi-independent agencies, it is interacting with the entire global economy. Therefore, the perception and the reality that it is free of political pressure from any chief executive has to be protected, not just judicially, but for the betterment of the entire country. The Federal Reserve, the Supreme Court, as I read this, and I believe Jan and Jessica would agree with me on this, is different. A quasi-independent agency isn't. It has connections to the executive branch, and the executive branch can reach in there and do things that, starting in 1935, the court said, no, we're going to give these quasi-independent agencies a little bit of buffering. Gradually, in court judgments since 1935, that buffering has been eroded. This is the final straw that breaks that camel's back of buffering around these quasi-independent agencies. So they're different. They are much more attuned to the whims and the attitudes of the sitting chief executive, but the Federal Reserve is not. And for those who trade and interact with the U.S. economy, they will breathe an enormous sigh of relief. The politics of it are pretty simple. Everyone in America more or less agrees, and did agree until President Trump came along, that the Federal Reserve did have this special status. President Trump tried to change that. The Supreme Court said, not so fast.
Major, thank you very much. So recapping for people just joining us, this is good news for those who value the independence of the Fed. Lisa Cook, a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors who had been fired by President Trump, citing alleged mortgage fraud. She had no opportunity to respond to that charge, and she denied them. She will not lose her position. The Fed is independent in a way that other agencies are not. Rebecca Slaughter's outcome is different. The buck stops with the president. Our coverage will continue on our streaming channel, CBS News 24/7, on your local news, and, of course, tonight on the CBS Evening News. Many of you will now return to CBS Mornings. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Tony Dokoupil in New York.